I'll be the first to admit that this all could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life, you should not be afraid of ghosts. Fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mum owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with a realtor and lawyer. So, for that time period, the cabin was not going to be rented out and would be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed to the cabin in my dad's car, which he left me in his will. Now, this is our family cabin that my parents rented out when they weren't using it. I had the keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarms. So I didn't feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them on my stay. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and played PlayStation and listened to music during the evenings. I also did some drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much shut in. Aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes with my dog as company, and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room, a guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent in the living room, the kitchen, or the master bedroom. I had no reason to venture to the other rooms, and I always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, Pear. His name is Midnight, by the way, and he has also since passed by. Then played some video games and watched some movies. That day was forecasted for pretty heavy snowfall, so I didn't feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car, and decided to stay in. This is where things began to get a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins, aside from these 2, were over a mile away. Surrounding us was a forest of very tall pine trees. This particular detail will be important later on. From the past couple of days, I knew that both of these cabins were empty. I think I've given enough background. No, I'm going to jump into the strangeness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked somewhat fresh, like someone had been here in the last 20 to 30 minutes. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me, and I may not have noticed. Perhaps they were shut-ins like me. Whatever. The footprints led away from the cabin and disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I didn't think much of it and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head off to bed. Midnight was lying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perked out. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out. I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs and started to do his doggy dance, which was his way of telling me that he had to go pee. Well, fine. I couldn't say no to him. So we both went downstairs to the outside driveway so he could do his business. The only thing is, he didn't have to go. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me off somewhere. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the footprints had been earlier. He also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up to the roof. After he figured out that he was not going to go where he wanted to, he sat himself down and just stared into the dark, which was a bit unusual for him. Perhaps there was an animal somewhere out there in the forest he wanted to chase down. But that I didn't want to chance anything. So I pulled him back inside, and we both went back upstairs. Around 30 minutes later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. I tried to rationalize that it could have been a pine cone falling from a tree. Or maybe a harmless crater from the forest was running around up there. But here, the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart at a length too wide to be a small animal, or even a man. You notice things like that when you're in an isolated setting like this. It was really getting under my skin. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony's screen door, expecting me to let him out. All right, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time, I considered myself to be fairly well-built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and my shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out to the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my flashlight. Nothing was there, and the snow on top looked undisturbed. Must have all just been in my head, right? But what about Midnight hearing the noise as well? Maybe he was feeding off my fear and paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. I turned off the flashlight and allowed my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I was just staring at the forest next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a bit taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position between two branches. He looked very tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and was extremely thin. It was squatted on one branch, and its abnormally long white arms were extended above its head, holding on to another branch above it. Its mouth was wide open with no expression. What is there? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing or not, and I stood there, just staring, motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and started pacing behind me, lightly barking at the same time. Still, the thing did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction. But something in my head told me that that was not a good idea. espresso. I carefully backed up to inside the room, called midnight back in, and shut the door. Once I locked out, I shined the light in the thing's direction, but nothing was there. I then closed the curtains and retreated back to bed. Later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was strumming on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door but wouldn't go anywhere near. The strangest part was I had the feeling like something was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice inside my head telling me to stay where I was. I eventually passed out. When I woke up the next morning, it didn't take me long to pack everything up and get the hell out of there. In 1984, when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Allenstown, New Hampshire. Burr House sat at the end of a dirt road near Bearbrook State Park. In front of our house was an open field that had small tree patches here and there. After what I estimate to be about 50 yards, the field ended and the forest began. One day, my friend and I wanted to go exploring further than we had before. We were very familiar with the first acre or two of forest we usually roamed around in, and wanted to cover some new ground that day. Shortly after passing the usual landmarks, we came upon a dirt ridge. Beyond that, we saw a clearing with a row of 4 cabins. The area included a shallow pond, a dense wall of trees on either side, patches of bushes between the cabins, and a few cars that looked like they had been torched. The cabins had that typical lined wood look with flat rooftops. When we first discovered this place, we thought it was an abandoned resort or something. However, when we peered through the windows, most of the cabins contained furniture and beds. There was no one in sight. I remember feeling creeped out as we moved from cabin to cabin, and I would soon discover why. Behind one of the cabins was a dirt bed with half-buried animal bones scattered across it. If these remains were from hunting, surely they wouldn't want vultures buzzing around their resort. I thought it was odd, but not too alarming. My mom always told me to stay away from dead animals because they could be carrying some kind of disease. So we didn't feel the need to go poking around the pet cemetery and soon left. Curiosity got the better of us, and we returned a week later during our second visit. I noted how odd it was that there were no signs or markers indicating who owned this property or if it was a private campsite. There were also no roads leading there. This time, it felt like we were being watched, though I didn't see anyone at first. As we prepared to leave, a tall man wearing a dark jacket emerged from the trees and ran toward us. He was about 100 meters away with a rifle slung over his back. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he shouted. My friend and I started running away. The man followed us, unslinging his rifle and shouldering it as if he meant to fire at us. We climbed over the dirt ridge and ran without stopping until we got back to my house. We never told my parents or anyone else about the incident. We didn't want to be restricted on future explorations, but I don't remember ever going back there. What happened to us could be chalked up to a couple of kids trespassing on private property. But a year later, hunters found a 55-gallon metal drum in a wooded area close to where those cabins were. Inside were the bodies of a woman and a young girl. At the time, the victims were not identified, and the case remained unsolved. That was until 15 years later when a second drum was discovered containing the bodies of 2 girls, about 100 yards away from where the first one was found. One of the victims was only 11 months old. DNA testing later linked the victims to a serial killer named Terry Rat. I never got a good look at the man who chased us away from the cabins that day, so I can't say for sure if it was him or not. But when I think back to that place, I think about how some people say that they never found all of Terry's victims. And I always remember those bones we saw scattered about. I honestly don't think 80-year-old me could tell the difference between animal and human bone. I heard a story on your channel about the 1977 Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, and it brought to the surface a story from my own family's history. These events happened before I was born. Had things played out differently, I wouldn't be here today. The year was 1981. The Caddy Resort was a sleepy getaway nestled in the mountains of Northern California. It was the kind of place folks went to fish, drink, and forget about their troubles for a while. My family was staying at Cabin 28. My grandmother, Sue, her 5 children, and a couple of their friends. They were just enjoying their stay and doing the typical things you would do at a cabin in the woods. They were completely unaware that something evil was making its way through the trees toward the resort. And at Cabin 28, no one knows exactly what took place on the night of April 11th, 1981. But it was theorized that someone, possibly more than one person, knocked on the cabin door between 10 o'clock p.m. and 2 o'clock a.m. Investigators believed that the individuals were known to my grandmother, and she allowed them to enter the cabin. Once inside, the assailants attacked. There was a struggle. Sue, my Uncle John, 15, and his friend Dana, 17, were bound with wire, then struck and stabbed multiple times with a hammer and knife. The following morning, around 8, one of the daughters returned from a sleepover at her friend S' cabin and discovered the bodies in the living room. She screamed and ran to the neighbors for help. Hence, once the police arrived, it was discovered that one of the children was missing. It was my aunt, Tina, who was only 12. At the time, her remains would be found 3 years later. It is possible she witnessed what took place in the living room that night and was abducted and later murdered in cold blood, due to a botched investigation. No arrests were ever made, and the murders remained unsolved to this day. Bear in mind that there is much more to this story, and many questions surrounding this case have never been answered. I've summarized things a bit because these are my family members we're talking about, and I can't bring myself to go into further detail about their horrifying death. I will tell you that the girl who discovered the bodies the morning after is my mother, Sheila Sharp. People that I've shared this story with have made comparisons to the Friday the 13th movies, and I can definitely see. However, I think most horror movie fans view Jason Voorhees as cool or badass, but I don't share their enthusiasm. Jason Voorhees is a fictional character, but the influences that created him are very real. In my case, it's hard for me to separate fiction from reality. I cool unwatch those films and not think about how all those deaths would affect so many families like they did in mine.